Okay, let me just turn off all my noise making things. Um, Notifications.
I had it. Yeah, I'm the same way.
So I just have to say, hi, I'm Sharon Salzberg, and this is your superior self.
Mm-hmm. And I'm ready whenever you are. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sharon Salzberg, and this is your superior self.
Sharon, thank you so much for joining the show. This is a treat. I'm really a fan of your work, fan of your story, and I just cannot wait to connect with you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I mean, you're known for bringing meditation back to the West. I mean, come on. I got to have you on the show.
I don't know. That may be undue credit. I mean,
Ah. We'll talk about that, right? So you grew up in New York, right? You go to India when you're what, 20?
I was 18.
18? What was that like for someone back in the day in the 70s, young 18 to go to India? What was it like for you?
It was crazy. I was a college student. I went to school. I went to college at the age of 16. I'm a product of the New York City public school system, which meant in those days, at any rate, they liked people to skip grades if they could. So I skipped 2 grades. I went to college when I was 16. When I was 17, as a sophomore, I took an Asian philosophy course, and
Mhm.
it was in the context of that course that I heard that there was such a thing as meditation. So, and that if you did it, if you actually practiced it, you could be a lot happier. So, I was going to school in Buffalo, New York. I looked around Buffalo. I did not see it anywhere because this is 1970,
Mhm.
and I created an independent study project and presented it to the university and said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay. Like education was kind of wild in those days. And um, I went off and that is a moment I think about a lot because it was pretty extraordinary. I wasn't very brave. I was 18. I'd never even been to California before. And I, like many people, could have a big habit of deferring, like, oh, that'll work for other people. It won't work for me. Or maybe I'll try it when I'm in graduate school in, 5 years or whatever. But instead, I just said, no, I have to learn how to do it. And off I went. So that was really the beginning of really the rest of my life.
What was it like when you get to India, right? Like, so you have this class you want to take meditation, right? You're learning about that. Like, when you get there, did you have another group of students that are there that are helping you push you along that path? I mean, was there a teacher, a guru? What did that look like?
It looked a little different at different times. Like I went with a small group of people, and it wasn't as simple as getting to India because we went overland from Europe. So it was like, lots of countries in between, and buses and trains, and it was intense. From especially for me, like it was just like
Yeah.
I'd never been anywhere. And when I got to India itself, I really felt a kind of homecoming feeling, and
Mm.
but it took a while to find what I was looking for because I wanted like something very direct and practical, and not a lot of. I didn't want a guru, I didn't want to become a Buddhist or um, get a new identification, a new identity, or reject anything else. And that took a while. I finally really did find that in the context of this intensive 10-day retreat, which began January 7th, 1971.
Wow.
That was my beginning.
So that entire journey, would you do that like even now? I mean, looking back, would you
Oh
do that
God, no.
journey again?
No. I would fly, like the best class I could afford. I'm older, like,
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, that sounds interesting. I mean, it sounds like a great time, like all the experiences, all the people that you met over
well,
that
I mean, it
journey.
was wonderful. Like in my first retreat, I met Ramdas and Krishnadas, Joseph Goldstein, people who are still, well, Ramdas just passed, but people who are still my very close friends. And it was an extraordinary experience because there was the teacher, and in the tradition, the earliest teachers I had were either Burmese or had themselves practiced in Burma, and they don't really use a the idea of a guru. They call it a kalyanamita in Pali language. It means a spiritual friend.
Mhm.
So it's a certain kind of relationship that is more.
So what was
Uh,
Ram Dass like back then?
he was Ramdas already. He'd been, fired from Harvard, had gone to India, met his guru. It's called Ramdas. He came back to the States. He went back to India. So when we were there, the first ever copy of Be Here Now arrived for him to look at, which was in a box. This came in a box, and instead of being bound as a book. And there were a whole bunch of people there at that retreat who decided to leave with Ramdas to look for the guru named Curly Baba, and they left as like Jeffrey and Linda, and the next time I saw them, they all had Hindu names, and they were different people.
Did you ever meet him, his
I
guru?
never did. No.
No. Yeah, I read Be Here Now. I have it. It's just different. Like, you have to read it like this. You have to open it up. It's on like brown pages. It's Ram Dass, which led me to you. What was it? Just meditation, right? Like meditation work and finding instructors or source or content that really I can relate to because it's um the one thing I like about your work is how you keep going back to center and how you keep the one thing that you said that really stood out to me. Like I just love this. It's like learning how to forgive yourself and starting over, right? Like a lot
Hmm.
of I didn't think about that, right? Like I just kept thinking I was failing. Like I was like, why can't I do this?
Yeah.
And like I read some of your work and it was like you're learning not only to meditate, you're learning to love yourself.
Yeah. No.
And that was
Totally.
a game changer for me.
Yeah. I mean, it is the unspoken gift and exercise too, because I don't think you can do any method of meditation, even if the word love or compassion or self compassion is never spoken. I don't think you can do it successfully all that well without actually cultivating that, because it's like many
Mhm.
foundational exercises. For example, will have us choose an object of awareness, whether it's a mantra or a sound or an image or the feeling of the breath, which was my first instruction that I ever got, or loving kindness, whatever it is, there's an object. And we rest our attention on that object, and then our minds wander. It's just going to be that way. So, how are we when we realize that? And it's so tempting because of conditioning, just to realize, oh, I'm not with the breath. I'm a failure. I'm terrible. I'm the worst meditator in this room. Everyone else is doing great. And if we get lost in that for a good long time, not only have we added a tremendous amount of time to the distraction, but it's so demoralizing. It's so exhausting that we actually can't just start over and pick up. And so it's not useful as a mental habit. And the only way we can really do it well as a process is to let go and begin again and let go and begin again. And that means we can't fall into that trap of all that old conditioning. And we are cultivating a kind of self compassion.
What does your meditation look like now?
Um, well, for a long time, it was basically my sitting meditation. I do sit every day, would be like some kind of awareness practice, either with the breath or a more open awareness, usually more open awareness. And loving kindness, which is its own method, was something I did. As I put it, I had a resolve to do loving kindness practice whenever I was waiting, and I counted every mode of transportation as waiting. So every airplane, taxi, walking down the streets of New York, waiting in line somewhere, uh, and so we do that sometimes anyway. We distinguish like that dedicated period of 10, 20 minutes, half an hour, however, whatever it is when we're, let's say, sitting. And then the rest of the day when we're kind of sprinkling awareness, or, we call it short moments many times. And so that's the way it was for a long time. And now in, these pandemic times, I'm not traveling and I'm not walking down the street in New York. I'm sitting in my house in Massachusetts. So I've incorporated a lot more formal loving kindness as well into my sort of dedicated
That's more
practice.
important now than ever, I think, with everything that's going on. I mean, our brains or our minds are idle a lot of the time, especially through the pandemic. And we were in survival mode when it first happened, and now it's kind of like now you kind of get used to it, and now we're having this pandemic hangover, and your brain starts to just sit idle and bad thoughts come up when you're idle and you have like I've been very connected to like your methods recently, and it's helped me a lot, just kind of like I said, love myself more and forgive myself because like you said earlier, I was I was judging the way that I was meditating, and
Mhm.
I didn't feel like it was adequate. I felt like I wasn't getting what it was like a competition, right? Or
Yeah.
it was like
Yeah.
the Western mind where I got to do this. I gotta succeed at this. How am I going to be? I want to be successful. I want to get to that nirvana. I want to get to the enlightenment. That's my
Hmm.
goal, right? And you don't. I mean, enlightenment. I mean, that shouldn't be your goal, should it? I mean, it should be something more.
Well, I mean, you can relate to it as a goal, but it depends on how you relate to goals, like,
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever felt that for yourself? Like, have you ever, like Ram Dass in his books would like, when he was talking about LSD, he would take, LSD around with him and he would talk to some of these, Indian meditators, and they were so advanced in what they did. Like they would take the LSD and they were like, it does nothing for me. Like I choose meditation over LSD. And he tells a story where he gave his guru like I don't know 1,200 I don't know milligrams or whatever it is of LSD, and he had like no effects on him whatsoever. Have you ever experienced those types of, I guess, levels of consciousness?
um, I think we all have, honestly, but usually it's extremely brief and therefore not that impactful.
Mm,
And that's sort of the point, and that's like those gurus' point about uh the drugs. I think Neem Karoli Baba said something to Ramdas like, "Oh yeah, yogis of old were always talking about this, soma or whatever, but the idea ultimately is to dwell in these spaces and not have a
that's exactly right. It's like
flash,
a flash in a pan, right? Instead of
Yeah,
having that,
yeah,
you're there, and that's what they
yeah,
had.
yeah.
Like, it's so interesting too because like you're seeing a lot more resurgence in LSD therapies now, especially with Johns Hopkins and how the one thing that I didn't realize was the LSD and some of those modalities aren't really like it's a key to unleashing your consciousness um and seeing the world, right? And it's just it's been his book, your stuff is allowing me to and it's allowing me to see that you can, the human body is so powerful, the human mind is so powerful, consciousness is powerful, and that you can do and reach these places without having to do LSD or drugs, right? You can
Mhm,
get to these
mhm.
states of mind and these states of peace, equanimity, and it's going to take work though. That's one thing you make very clear, right? Like it's going to take a lot of work. It's not a short game whatsoever.
No, no, it takes work. It definitely takes work.
Um, so what like you have written some fantastic articles.
Thank
You've
you.
you've written I think for Oprah's magazine, right? Like Huffington Post, you've done a lot of stuff there. Um, what are you working on currently? I know you got a lot of books too.
I've written 11 books. My last book was called Real Change. I wrote every word of it before the pandemic, and it came out after the pandemic. Not every word, because it was supposed to come out in June. It came out in September, and a friend of mine was reading it to excerpt it, and he said to me, I keep reading those examples. This is not post pandemic. He said, I keep reading those examples and thinking that's what made you anxious. Wait till you see what's coming. So I went back to the publisher and I said, would it be okay if I wrote a new preface that would kind of ground the book in the current rather extreme
Sure.
reality? And they said yes. So the preface was written after the pandemic, but everything else was written before.
Oh,
And I just signed a book contract yesterday.
oh, congratulations.
And thank you. And I have another one cooking actually, which might also happen just to drive myself crazy. I'll try to.
What is your, I guess, routine? Like when you get, how do you get yourself into that, right? Like, to write a book back to back like that.
um, well, it's odd, it's actually it was very impactful on me that I wrote Real Change before the pandemic, and then the whole world turned upside down. Because in terms of a mode of expression, books are very slow.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody today who has a book coming out, and I said, "Did you write it before the pandemic?" And I I I think my book before Real Love was coming out, and a friend of mine from the tech world asked me, like I said, I told her, I said, "Hey, I turned in my book today," and she said, "When does it come out?" And I said, "In a year," and she said, "What a dinosaur industry," because compared to tech, it's like,
Sure, sure.
12 minutes is a while, not 12 months. So,
But the return on investment on those books,
yeah.
right? Like I don't know if you know Steven Kotler. He's one of my favorite authors too. He talks about the return on investment on books, like blogs and stuff will, take him a couple of hours. But if you look at books, like his most recent one, years, right? That's years of work, years of research. Same with you. I mean, that's how I look at it. I go and buy a book for 25 bucks or 30 bucks. I'm getting years worth of work in somebody's life, and it's so invaluable. Just some of the content. I mean, it really helps you. It really I love books. Speaking of books, what author or what book has been most inspirational for you? I know it's probably changed a lot, but I want to know what sparked it. I mean, you said meditation when you found it in New York, the class. Like after that, when you came back and you started the institute, like was there somebody that helped kept fueling that fire?
I'd say Ramdas, but not through a book, because he was at my first
Well, see, you
retreat.
were lucky. You had Brahm Dass, like you guys are friends. Like,
Yeah, 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 yeah. So he would come. I'm speaking to you from Barre, Massachusetts, and the Insight Meditation Society is right next door through the forest. So he would come here and sit, and sometimes he was writing, and he was very inspiring and always helpful because it was also weird, like if you told people you were teaching meditation in those days, they were like, "Oh, weird," and to open up a place and never know how many people were going to be interested. And, so he was always really helpful. I would say actually one of the most impactful books for me has not changed at all since I first read it. And that's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind,
I'll
which
write
is
that
a,
down.
a very, it's not a big book, it's not bulky or anything. And it's got illustrations even. It's written very simply. And I it was just one of those things, like the title is Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And, I had gone to India. I ended up staying more than a year, even though I only had a year through the school. So then I came back. I went back to Buffalo. I did what I needed to do to get 2 years of independent study credit. And then I went back to India to keep practicing. And so in that period that I was back, I saw that there was this book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I was really, dismissive. I thought, oh, I know what that's about. Like you start out with a beginner's mind and you struggle and you work and you try and someday you achieve like a Zen mind. So I went back to India. I never got the book. And in those days, I remember this is pre-internet. No one had a computer. No one had a fax machine. No one had a cell phone. And there were very, very few books in English. Um, Everyone had a notebook. I still have my notebook. It's upstairs. And if somebody said something like inspiring, you wrote it down. Or if you had a thought that you thought you needed to remember, you wrote it down. So we all actually still have our notebooks. Uh, and if somebody sent a book in English, it was like a very precious commodity. And somebody sent me a copy of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So then I read it, and I realized I could not have been more wrong. That it was totally the opposite. That the beginner's mind was really the goal. It wasn't like this clumsy, awkward thing you were trying to get over. And so many of the passages in it, they're very, very simple, but it really expresses that. So here's one for you. Suzuki Roshi, who wrote it, said something like, this is not exact, but it's close. We practice not to attain Buddha nature, but to express it.
Mm,
So it's not like we're starting from this place of deficiency and deficit. And we've got to get something that'll make us whole.
yeah,
We practice to express that wholeness of our being.
yeah. That is powerful. Yeah, because it's like I've been reading Andrew Harvey lately too. I'm
Mhm,
sure you know him. Um, and I read his first. I was reading his first book, and he was talking about his teacher that he who he met, and he was talking about just basically just like envisioning who it is that you relate to. Like I relate to Christ, right? Growing up with my background, and some people it might be Buddha or someone else, and just sitting down and envisioning him sitting next to you, and just the more clear you can make that picture, I guess that's the key. That's the point, right? Like I don't, just seeing him, and I guess as you do that, he comes more alive to you, and then you come to a place where you can I mean, I would say you can communicate with that
mhm,
person.
mhm,
And I've been doing it. It's tough. It's tough. I thought it would like reading it, right? You're thinking, well, I guess I can imagine myself. I can imagine Sharon sitting over there. But when you sit down, and I do it in the morning, sit down on a pillow and try to do it, it's tough. I mean, it's not easy. Um, what I mean, like, so what is that? Like, all right, so there is removing the thought, or we're trying to come back to the breath, and then there's some people that do the envisioning stuff, trying to use their imagination to go places.
mhm.
I know it's different for everyone as far as meditation, but what has, in your experience, what has been the most impactful technique?
Well, they do different things, so that's a little hard because things are impactful at different times. I'd say that um, one of the theories behind meditation practice is that uh, our goal or our effort is to bring our system into balance, because out of that balance, the things that we want, like peace, love, insight, will come by themselves.
Hmm.
And that's different than our normal, more like grabby mentality. Like I need an insight by Tuesday, then I won't have to sit again until next week, or something like that. So the work is toward this kind of balance, and balance is always shifting. Like sometimes we're too immersed in our emotions. Let's say we're overcome by them. We have no perspective. Sometimes we're too distant, and too removed. And so working over time, we come to a place of balance. We learn what that feels like. So there were times when, and even now, when going back to 101, feel your breath. It helps me center. Even the words I used when I was describing it, should we rest our attention on the feeling of the breath? That's not so easy.
Hmm.
Usually we grab onto it. And so there's a quality of rest, of presence that comes just from that simple technique. There are parts of mindfulness practice that are about being with the different sensations and emotions that may arise. And sometimes those emotions are very painful. So it's learning how to be with them without adding sense of isolation, like I'm the only one, or blame, I shouldn't be feeling this, or permanence, this is going to last forever. And sometimes those emotions are really beautiful and wondrous and opening, and we may be afraid of that, or we may feel we don't deserve it, or we may be so distracted we don't notice it. So we change our relationship to those as well. So that's important, both then and now. And I would say certainly loving kindness, because that became sort of my main focus in teaching, where instead of, say, resting our attention on the feeling of the breath, we rest our attention on the silent repetition of certain phrases like, may I be happy, may you be happy. And it's a quality of gift giving, of offering, that we tune into and connecting,
Hmm.
to ourselves and to others in a different way. So it's probably the primary technique that I would talk about, is loving
Sure.
kindness.
You have some I think you do some webinars or something, right? Like I've seen
Mhm,
you, I think you do some Facebook lives or something. I enjoyed them. The question Q&A sessions I think
mhm.
are great. When do you think is the institute, I'm assuming the institute is shut down for right now.
Yeah.
Um any projections on when you might start doing some more stuff with that, or
That is a big question. I mean, honestly, I came up here last year. I came up on March 14th, 2020. I rent a little apartment in New York, but I also have this house, which I've had for a really long time. The center is right through there. And I spent the month of February in California and got back to New York early March, I think March 2nd. Went up to Kripalu to teach a retreat with Krishnadas. So Kripalu is this yoga center in the Berkshires, and there were 200 people, literally in an airless room, no open windows, singing. So it's like could not be a worse picture for aerosol transmission. But nobody knew that then, and
Sure, sure.
I got back to New York City that Sunday night. I taught a class on Monday, literally in an airless room, no windows, about 120 people. And then I had lunch with somebody in this same place, and I kept feeling uneasy. I kept thinking, this doesn't feel good, and uh, it was just like a little table, and I thought, if this were the flu and she were sick, I'd be freaked out, and I don't know if
Yeah,
she's sick or not, and like,
yeah.
and I just thought, you know what? I have this other house, I have this other place to be. Let me go up there for 2 weeks. So I came up here with my snow boots, thinking I was going to be here for 2 weeks, and the center was still open. And then we closed down before the government, before the state, the Commonwealth said we had to close, and it was just like that. Well, we'll be closed for a month, or we'll be closed for 3 months, and then we'll be closed for 6 months, and um, we will reopen. I feel really lucky, that all
Mhm.
conditions are in place so that we can do that. Maybe in the summer, more likely in the fall, and I just keep watching like what happens with theater, and
Yeah,
congregate places, and trying to understand and um, what it's going to look like, And in
yeah.
the meantime, we are taking the opportunity to do like the ventilation and things like that. That
Sure. Yeah, you gotta do that. Yeah, that's big time. Filters and all that. Purification, humidifiers. I can like to explain the energy. Like when you go to these retreats, when you have people come in from all over the world that want to sit in Sharon Salzberg's meditation retreat, like what I can only imagine. Like, and I'm sure you probably have Jack Cornfield too, and Tara
yeah,
Brock come in, and
yeah,
back in the day when you had Ram Dass,
yeah.
Krishna Das. Like, what's the energy like?
I think the energy is extraordinary, and it's because of the people. The people who come to sit, and we just celebrated our 45th anniversary,
Oh, that's awesome.
and yeah, on Valentine's Day. We moved in on Valentine's Day, 1976. And I'll tell you this, I went back to New York. I had to get something for my apartment. And I thought I was going to go back again, but didn't happen, because there was another surge. But I did go back there for like 6 days in early November. And I walked in, somebody goes in to clean, and somebody goes in to like pick up my mail and stuff like that, but nobody's there. I
Mhm.
walked in and it felt like so lonely and vacant, like it was just waiting for someone to live there again. And somewhere in that same period, I went over to the retreat center because I had to film something, and uh, we couldn't figure out a place where the camera person could be far enough away from me, and
Sure.
all the stuffs except for the meditation hall. So I went into the meditation hall, and it felt like people had just sat there like a minute and a half before. It was filled with light.
Mm.
And that sense of absence was just not there at all. It was such a complete energy field.
I think you're gonna have so much like when you guys get geared up to go, I think you're gonna have record numbers to be honest with you because I think a lot of well, I think you're seeing a shift in this world. I think in awareness and consciousness and this people are wanting more. I think we're hitting that a shift and people want to find out more about themselves. This has been a slowdown that's been beneficial, I think, for mankind. And I think you're going to see a direct result from that, especially, you being an expert in this field of self, diving into yourself and finding out what's there. Right.
Hmm.
I think you're going to see a resurgence in numbers. I don't know. I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited to see what this brings for everyone, really. I mean, you know, the common good for men and women around the world, just trying to figure out more about how do I tap into that higher self and that higher consciousness, the collective consciousness, and learn more about who we are and what our true powers are. Like, I'm so excited for that. I mean, I can see it now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they also keep shifting. I mean, I totally agree. There's been a massively renewed interest or new interest in practices like this, and I think that's all to the good. Like it depends. I think on how safe people are going to feel, and I mean, I keep saying I'm weird. I am weird. Like I look at photos of 10-year-old photos of everyone in a room together, and I think they're very close together. And it's like
Yeah, you're not going back to New York.
it's like culture shock. I know I have to make that adjustment back to, it's okay. We can be in a room together. Um, so in the beginning, when there was still so much unknown and so many of our people come from New York City, I kept saying, what New Yorker wants to get in a bus for 4 hours, like, and sit in a place with strangers where you have to share a bathroom, like,
Yeah.
uh, but now it feels different,
Yeah, sure. You guys are like, you have property there too, right? Like where you're at an institute, so you could do especially when summer. I don't know, maybe what that looks like, but you can definitely do things outside, and that'd be great. And then that will roll into the fall, and then who knows, we'll where we'll be in the winter. But I just got my first shot today, actually.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I think it's very important. Um, yeah. I just think we're just in a weird spot right now. It's like that when you wake up, when you wake up from a long nap and you're just kind of like getting coming out of this. I
Yeah,
just feel like
yeah,
this has been a long nap and we're waking up and we're trying to figure out where the heck we're at. And I know you see it more than ever because I mean, you have this huge following and
yeah.
you're very connected to that following. You have your thumb on the pulse and you hear their problems, their concerns. What is the most common? Like, what are you hearing from from your following the most?
Well, it was waves, like everyone's different, but there's also a kind of collective movement. I'd say, in the beginning was anxiety, and then it was real grief, and then a lot of anger, and then exhaustion. And I think
Mm,
people are just coming out of the exhaustion, and not everyone is. I mean, it depends. Sometimes like I'm teaching on Zoom and I'm reading the chat, and people write things like, "I'm living in a nursing home, haven't had a visitor in a year," or school teachers write and say, "My kids aren't learning remotely, and they're really depressed, and I'm really depressed because I feel I can't help them." So there's a lot of suffering out there, and at the same time, people also say, uh, I was talking to somebody earlier today, and like I don't miss those business lunches, I don't miss that life.
I don't miss traffic for sure.
Yeah, and
You know,
constant travel, and
yeah, that's for the birds. I said that to my wife today. I was like, it was too peoply. Like it was just when you go out somewhere. I mean, they couldn't have done it better as far as having the setup that they had and the lines and it just worked well. But it was just like, ugh, there's so many people here. It's like, and it's going to take a while to get out of that. It's just we've been doing this for man, it feels like forever. I feel bad for the kids. Like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
like my daughter who's 2, she's like, she's a quarantine baby, and so like she has a tough time sharing. It's just I have that problem too. I don't know if I'll be able to share when I get out of this or not, but I'm excited to see where we go for sure. I think it's you know what I like about the content that I've learned about. This is the one thing I like is that I've been able to find the content during this that has helped me progress, right?
yeah.
Like your content, Ram Dass's content. I don't it's so it's so nice, and I say this a lot, like, how you found home with India when you went there? Like, when I listen to you guys, I feel home, right? Because I don't feel like it's put together. I don't feel like it's built up. I feel like it's natural, right? Like, when I hear him talk about the spacesuits that we wear, right? When I hear you talk about meditation, it comes from a place or it comes from you who I can relate to. And it makes me feel good because it's like it's not some holy person that is doing this that I can't see myself being, if that makes sense. And that's one thing that I want to thank you for is this how you open yourself up and how you present yourself as Sharon, as nothing else
Hmm.
more than that, right? Like you present yourself as this, as you are, and it's helped me so much. So I just wanted to say, I'm a fan. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Yeah. No, I think it's important, like, and it's just natural. I mean, it's sort of hard to know how else to be. Like,
Yeah. Well, he said that, right? Like, he would say like in his book, I think it's Being Ron Dass. I don't know. Have you read his latest book? Have you
I've looked through it. Yeah, mostly I've
That's
looked at the pictures, but I blurred it. I think I read it. That
I think it's
way.
like 8 I listened to it on Audible. It's like 18 hours of just
Yeah, it's very long.
straight great content, like great. And I think Krishna Das, I think he reads does he read it? Somebody reads it.
I don't know because I haven't heard it on Audible.
Yeah, somebody that's very close to him reads it and does a fantastic job. Um, it's just, it's you don't realize what love is until you read something like that. And what's funny is he's like, you want to test your spirituality, go hang out with your family for a week, and he demonstrates that in his book. Like, do you ever have problems with that? Like, you feel like you're on this spiritual path, or you're on this path, and like things keep pulling you off. And I mean, can you talk about that? Like, give me an example.
Well, I don't know that things pull us off, but they challenge us for sure. And sometimes, I mean, I think it's really important, like exactly what you pointed to, like beginning again is really the essential skill because people use language in such a way that reflects a different belief. And people ask me all the time, how do I stay mindful all day long? How do I keep the level of concentration that I got in the retreat? How do I stay resilient, all the time? And my answer is, you're not. It's not going to be that way. You'll fall down, you'll blow it, you'll overreact, you'll get exhausted, but you can start over. And that's what we learned. So have I ever fallen down? Yes, definitely. Like uh and that's why, like, that's the first thing I learned in meditation, and it's probably the most important thing I ever learned in meditation. Like, and because all a part of that is don't be so hard on yourself. You haven't failed. You can be resilient. You can, like, lessons learned,
Yeah.
you can start over in a better way. And that's really crucial. And other than having an image, of yourself that's so perfect. And Ramdas was like the perfect teacher about that. He'd say, like, I'm sure he went through long, long periods where he was a vegetarian, certainly in India, and then other times when he would like be eating spare ribs or something like that. And he'd be in a restaurant having ordered spare ribs, and there'd be this pile of bones in front of him. Somebody would come up to him and say, "Are you Ramdas?" Like adoringly, and then they look
Sure.
down.
And he'd be, yes.
Yes.
You're pretty tight with Jack Cornfield too. What's it like hanging out with him and meditating?
I don't see Jack all that often because he moved to California, and of course
Mm.
now we don't travel
Yeah,
anymore.
sure. So yeah.
Um, I met Jack. Well, I met Joseph Goldstein in my first retreat, which was in India, where I met Ramdas and all these people. And then I ended up coming back from India in 1974. Finally, I came back earlier and then went back. And Joseph was actually Ramdas was teaching at Naropa Institute. It was the first summer that it was opened, and Ramdas had this mega class of like 1,000 people, and he had little subgroups, like the chanting subgroup, which was led by Krishnadas, and he invited Joseph to teach the meditation subgroup. So we always say Ramdas gave Joseph his first teaching job, which is true, at Naropa. And Jack was living down the hall. That's where they met, and he was teaching his own class. And so I got back from India, and a whole group of us decided to go out and visit Joseph in Boulder. So I showed up like 2 weeks before the first summer session ended, and that's where I met Jack, who was living down the hall, and Joseph got invited to stay on for the second summer session, and I stayed on with him. And then we got invited to teach retreats, and so it was some combination of Jack or Joseph and I and other friends, and we go in different combos. And one day we decided to try to start a retreat center, which is what happened. So um,
How do you just try to start a retreat center? Like that, hey, let's start a retreat center. All right.
well, somebody actually suggested it to us, and we were in California at that point, and he said, "I know the perfect people to help you. They're all in Massachusetts," and he was right. 'Cause we knew nothing, it's like I don't know if I knew what a mortgage was, and Jack had been having a parallel life in Thailand when Joseph and I were in India, and he'd been a monk, for a while, and uh, we knew nothing. But these people all did know how to form an organization and look at property and
Mhm.
all of that. So
Well, back then you said like people didn't really understand what meditation was and probably looked at it differently too, right? Not probably not in a positive light. How did you like were you successful right out of the gate? Did it take time, years? Like what did that look like?
it depends on how you define success.
Ah, here
Like
we go. Western mindset. Yeah, I don't
we
know. I keep
bought,
calling that trap.
we bought the property. It was a Catholic novitiate run by the Fathers of the Blessed Sacrament, and the original building, which is still there, it sleeps about 100 people. And we added one wing, so everyone has a single room, but it always slept about 100 people, with plus office and meditation hall and kitchen, dining room, the whole thing, and 80 acres for $150,000, which we didn't have. And so we raised $50,000, which was a miracle, and the Fathers of the Blessed Sacrament, whose novitiate it was, gave us a $50,000 mortgage, and we couldn't get a bank to give us a mortgage
Hmm,
because we were too new and too weird, I'm sure. So three people went down to the bank and each got personal loans out
wow.
and lent us the money so we could open. And somebody's dad gave him a car. That's how we had a car. And we ate a lot of rice and beans. We charged $6.50 a night. Um, and if we had 30 people, we were ecstatic. Like, someone wants to meditate. And then, slowly it grew and it grew and it grew. And then I saw waves of people. Like in the beginning, it was often people who'd been to India with us or had some kind of connection like that. And then an awful lot of older people were coming, like people who'd retired and maybe they'd wanted their whole lives to do something like that. And they'd just been working and now they could, and then students started coming, younger people, and then artists started coming, and then scientists started coming, and then like all of a sudden all kinds of people were coming, and there were huge waiting lists for retreats, and it was hard to get in, and it was like a whole other world.
Scientists, I guess they wanted to study like the brain during meditation and see what the effects of that were. Like
Mhm.
they're coming out with some great science,
Yeah,
some
yeah,
great data on that. Like
yeah, yeah.
I would be interested in seeing like you, someone who's very experienced in meditation, like what the brain is actually doing. Like have you ever participated in that before?
I've never been an fMRI machine doing those studies, which is often how they do it. I did one study with this friend Judd Brewer, who at the time he's a psychiatrist. And at the time he was at Yale, now he's at Brown. And he was actually I was teaching at Yale this class, and he was testing this cap because sticking everyone in an MRI machine is very inconvenient. It's expensive and it's not very portable, So he
Sure.
was testing this cap that could check out your brain waves, and so that's the only time, and
Hmm.
it was interesting.
Yeah, I think Dr. Joe Dispenza does something like that at his retreats where they get like they all he does is collect data, like a ton of data. A lot of his books are database from his research. And they put these like you said, portable fMR, MRI machine things on your head, and you look at yourself while you're in these states of altered consciousness. The brain is it is just so interesting what happens. Especially if you do like a monk. Like you think about they spend their entire lives meditating, like the what the brain does and being able to see it. Like it's just crazy how we're like right you and I right now in this um this consciousness, what we think consciousness is right now, and then what the brain does, how it changes it, like it physically, not physical, like it just changes, and it's just amazing. I mean, it's just we don't know what we think we know about the brain.
Hmm.
It's intense. Yeah, I don't know what the future holds. I think that meditation for me. I mean, you think about how old it is. Like it. I mean, it's centuries old, and
Hmm.
it's not. And it's probably the the most effective tech that we have today that will help us relax, learn about who we are, about our emotions, emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
Um, it's the oldest saying, the oldest tool that we have, but people still don't use it, or people think that they can't sit down. I just think I don't know. I don't buy that excuse. I can't sit down for 10 minutes. And I'm sure you hear that all the time.
Hmm. Well, neuroscientists uh, say that they're always looking for what they call the dose response. Like what is the dose of meditation that would be most effective? And one very well-known neuroscientist said to me, 7 to 9 minutes a day will change your brain in a measurable way. In all the ways they apparently you want your brain to change. And then another neuroscientist friend said to me, 12 minutes a day is what her lab found. So, of
Hmm,
course, nobody knows and it's not precise, but nobody is saying you have to do the 6 hours a day to have measurable changes in your brain. And I think that's
sure.
remarkable.
What's the most that you've meditated in a day?
I don't know. Like I've done intensive retreats and probably 14 hours is, uh,
14 hours in
yeah.
one sitting? Or,
No, 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 in a day. But that's also, in my tradition, you do walking meditation as well. So it's like sitting meditation, walking meditation, sitting meditation, walking meditation.
sure. What are you chanting when you do that, when you're doing the walking? Like, I don't know, what's your go-to? Do you chant at all, like when you're walking and, throughout that meditation?
No, I mean, you could, but it's not a chanting tradition, unless you're chanting.
Yeah. Well, I'm
It's,
trying to figure out what I can use because I think like Ram Dass, he uses Ram, and Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. I could say God, or whatever. Like just trying to keep, he even says like this as you wash the dishes, you create this repetition that allows your mind to like kind of alter its state of consciousness. Um, yeah, I'm just a baby. I'm still learning about meditation.
yeah, and what it's good, because it's good to experiment. It's like the tradition I came from, it would be more like feel your feet against the ground. It's like they use a lot of awareness of body sensations because it's the most concrete thing.
Mm.
Like feeling the coolness of the glass. It just brings us back to the moment. And
I've never done that. I need to do that. Yeah, that sounds like so interesting. Like the senses and sensory reactions to
right,
things and
right,
concentrating on that. Wow.
right. So they use a lot of that. And some teachers would say the breath even when you're walking, but like my teachers would say, no, it's too subtle. And you want something, really easiest. And
Mm,
that would be like your feet against the ground, something like that.
that's awesome. Sharon, I could talk to you all night. How can people find more about you? How can they um, reach you or reach out or leave a message to you if they need to?
It's just SharonSalzberg.com from there.
Mhm. That's awesome. What about on Instagram, social media? You guys doing anything over there?
Yes. The thing I'm on incessantly is Twitter. It's at
So
Sharon.
that's the best place to reach you.
Well, yeah, that's true. Or email. And the email address is on the website.
All right. So last question, kind of big. What do you want your legacy to be?
Um, I feel like In a way, part of me wants to say, "I don't know yet," because part of me knows that I've already delivered it, you
Mm,
know, like, um, between the retreat center and, the practices in a very accessible way, and especially loving kindness practice, because I went to Burma in 1985 and did an intensive period of loving kindness and started teaching it right away, and I don't know anybody who, I mean, I'm sure there were people, there were probably Burmese monks and nuns somewhere teaching that technique in the States, but I didn't know where they were. And so, I feel, and it wasn't always understood or popular as a particular method. And it took a while, now it's just hitting its popularity now. So I really feel like that's my legacy.
it's beautiful. Sharon, thank you so much for joining. This has been fantastic. Like, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. It's great to meet you.